antropólogo William Ury é o mais importante negociador e mediador de grandes conflitos em todo o mundo. Ele já vendeu milhões de livros, entre eles Como Chegar ao Sim com Você Mesmo. Seus livros já foram traduzidos em 34 idiomas. Professor, muito prazer, muito obrigado por me receber aqui em São Paulo, no escritório de um amigo comum nosso, Alexandre. Queria que o senhor contasse um pouquinho da sua história. Como é que o senhor caminhou para esse lado das negociações, sua formação?
Yeah, well, I was trained as an anthropologist, which is a student of human beings, and human beings engage in a lot of conflicts. And I was also born in the shadow of the atomic bomb, and so I was always wondering, why are we getting into such a conflict, my country, the United States, and the Soviet Union, and imperiling the future of humanity? So that's what got me interested in negotiation.
1962, no?
1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. You know, if that crisis had gone slightly differently, we wouldn't be talking right now.
Essa foi sua primeira experiência teórica?
Well, it woke me up, but then I had the privilege, I worked for many years during the 1980s, helping the United States and the Soviet government build what are called nuclear risk reduction centers, which are places where you can communicate to avoid a war by accident, by mistake. And one of the things we studied was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we brought met people who were the surviving participants in the Cuban crisis in Moscow together in 1989. People like Robert McNamara, McGeorge Bundy, Andrei Gromyko, Anatoly Dobrinin, and asked what really
Eles
happened.
estavam todos envolvidos?
Todos. All the way around the table, we had them together to ask what really happened. How did we survive?
E o que aconteceu?
Well, it was amazing because it was a little bit tense at first, you know, because still the time of communism and people weren't used to talking. But
Guerra Fria.
But McNamara broke the ice. He said, you know, if I had been in your shoes, I might have assumed too, like you, that the United States was going to attack Cuba. So I understand what you did in bringing nuclear missiles. So immediately that began to relax, which is to me one of the very important things in negotiation, which is to put yourself in the other side's shoes. If you make that first step, then you can begin to create an atmosphere in which you can begin to reach an agreement.
O que você chama de colocar na varanda.
Yeah, exactly. It's to me the foundation of successful negotiation is to imagine you're negotiating on a stage like this, a piece of theater. Part of your mind goes to a mental or an emotional balcony, which is a place of calm, of perspective, of clarity, where you can see the picture and you can remember what is most important to you.
Voltando à questão de mísseis de Cuba, quem foi mais importante, o Khrushchev ou o Kennedy nessa?
You know, each was so important. If we'd had a president like, I don't know, Trump, you know, we would that would be it. But Kennedy was acutely aware. He had just read a history of how World War I had begun and how no one really wanted that war, but the war happened. And so he was very sensitive to how things might happen. And Khrushchev had been in World War II. And he wrote a personal letter to Kennedy during the crisis in which he said, I've seen the guns, the tanks roll in my lifetime. And he said it's like a knot. He gave this analogy. It's like a knot. And there's a rope, and there's a knot in the rope. And we're now pulling on it. And at some point, the only way we can cut it is with a sword of war. So they were speaking to each other, and they were both trying to find a way out of this crisis. And it was only by luck, really, and good statesmanship by both men, that we were able to survive.
Você acha que esse foi o momento mais delicado da história?
Yes, without question. That was the moment in which, you know, there were little accidents like during the midst of the crisis, an American plane was flying over Cuba to take photos, and the Russians shot a missile and shot it down. The pilot was killed, and the Americans were all prepared to invade Cuba at that point. And we thought that in the United States, in Washington, they thought, oh, that was a deliberate decision by Khrushchev. But no, we talked to the general, and he just saw the plane on his radar screen. He was in Cuba for 2 minutes, and he just decided by himself to do it. But that almost started the war.
Professor, o que é a arte da negociação?
The art of negotiation to me is, what's negotiation? It's something actually, it's something that we do, everyone does all the time. We're all negotiators. We may not realize it. It's simply back and forth communication like we're doing right now, except we're trying to reach some kind of agreement. And in that simple sense, we're negotiating with our children, with our spouses, with our friends, with our partners, our colleagues, our bosses, our employees. When I ask people how much they negotiate in that sense, they say, oh, half my time I'm negotiating.
Nesses dias tem um artigo na Folha de São Paulo falando que o Trump, se eleito, será mais perigoso que o Estado Islâmico.
Interesting. Well, you know, I mean, the thing is, in one sense, it's true because he has, if he became president of the United States, he's the president of the most powerful nation on the planet. ISIS, however difficult it is and however dangerous it is a few tens of thousands of people, but the United States could do a lot more in the hands of the wrong person.
Eu sei que você chegou da Suíça há pouco tempo e conversou com muita gente, sírios,
Sim.
sobre essa questão do Estado Islâmico. Essa é uma questão praticamente inegociável hoje, né?
It is, but it is and it isn't, because first of all, we have to negotiate to build a coalition to defeat ISIS, to deal with ISIS. And we also have to apply the same principles of negotiation to ISIS. We have to understand, why are they attracting tens of thousands of young people to their cause? If we don't put ourselves in their shoes, understand what the attraction is, we're never going to be able to combat the phenomenon.
Eles têm um produto, né? Um produto.
Yeah. They have a product, they're marketing it through the internet. They're very savvy at social media. And we need to have a counter product. What can attract people? What can give young people the sense of meaning, the sense of making a better world that ISIS is appealing to?
Quais são os grandes, na sua opinião, negociadores da história? Mandela, certamente?
Mandela, for sure. I had a privilege of going to South Africa. I met Mandela at one point, and I watched a situation where here was a man, he was put in jail for
27 years.
27 years. What was the first thing he did when he was in jail? The first thing he did was he learned the language of his enemy. Afrikaans. He studied their history. He learned about them. He learned about their sufferings, their story, and that equipped him to be a better negotiator. He went to the balcony. In fact, he even says in his autobiography, he learned how to negotiate with himself first. He learned how to deal with it because he was quick to react. He'd been a boxer, so he was quick to react. He learned how to manage himself, to me, which is the key to success in negotiation. If we can't influence ourselves first, how can we possibly influence someone else?
Falando um pouco assim dos grandes, né? Stalin, Roosevelt e Churchill.
Okay, so Stalin was not much of a negotiator. No. He was a dictator. Yeah. You know, he just ruled by power.
But naquele momento, né?
Yeah, but in that moment, absolutely. Yeah. After during World War II, people who would never ever have even sat in the same room together were able to create a coalition to defeat Hitler and then to try and build a world and the United Nations, the world that we inherit today. So in that sense, it was a very successful negotiation. Roosevelt had the long-term perspective. Churchill did too. But they were able to go to the balcony. That was the key. They were able to think not just of the next year, but think of the next generation or two generations and think, how is the world going to deal with its conflicts? And as difficult as we have it now, it was much worse back then. That's the thing. I mean, right now, there's a lot of fear in the world and even a lot of anger. But I think back to the Cold War, like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Even as dangerous as ISIS is, it's nothing compared to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is when, you know, all of humanity might have perished. So we have to kind of, again, put things in perspective and realize that there's hope, we can do this. It takes negotiation, it takes cooperation, and that's the great challenge facing us today.
Você falou em colocar em perspectiva, eu me lembrei do Schoenlein com Kissinger, sobre a Revolução Francesa. 200 anos é muito pouco tempo ainda.
That's it. That's it. We need to have that long-term perspective.
Exatamente. Você esteve há pouco tempo na Colômbia. Você ajudou naquelas negociações entre as Farc e o governo. Como foi?
Well, I've been involved. President Santos asked me to come to Colombia 5 years ago to advise him about how to even begin the process of how do you put an end to a 50-year civil war. And at that point, people thought there's a 2% chance, a 3% chance, because there'd been many attempts, all failed. What we tried to do was try to figure out how, this is one of the keys in negotiation, how do you build the other side a golden bridge? How do you make it as easy as possible for them to come and make a peace agreement, leave aside their weapons? And so what we did was we designed an agenda based on an understanding of their interests. We knew that they weren't just going to surrender, because after 50 years, what are they going to say to their troops? Oh, it's all over. They have to have some sense of honor and dignity. What they had fought for was land, injustice in land, inequality in land. So we began with the issue of land reform. We offered them the possibility of participating in politics so that they can try to advance their agenda through democratic means. And so we designed a little agenda. We then had secret talks in Havana for 6 months to see if we could agree on the formula. And once that was agreement, then Santos made those public, and now we're in the last month or two of reaching a final agreement. And it's an amazing history-making opportunity, because it's the end of a 50-year war, over 200,000 dead, 6 million internally displaced victims, and there's been a lot of innovations in the process, innovations in transitional justice, innovations in victim rights, innovations in the role of women. But the amazing thing too is it's the end of the last armed conflict in the entire hemisphere. So it raises the question, if we can put an end to war in one hemisphere, why not in two?
Professor, eu estava pensando aqui o senhor falando, o Papa foi muito importante também nessa negociação.
The Pope, to me, is one of the great lights in the world today. And yes, the Pope has played, he played an important role in bringing the United States and Cuba together. The negotiations take place in Cuba. And when the Pope visited Cuba, it gave an incentive. Even the FARC, you know, they look up to the Pope. Raúl Castro, you know, they right now people like the Pope, and so he plays a very important role of inspiring peace.
Evidente que a negociação é uma arte e nós precisamos nos preparar para isso, né? As universidades hoje, Harvard e outras, têm cursos, né?
Absolutely. When I began in the 1970s, there were no courses on negotiation. But now, every school, even around the world, but at Harvard, the business school, the law school, the school of government, major corporations, everyone recognizes that negotiation is a key skill for all of us. In fact, we should probably be teaching children in elementary schools, how do you resolve conflicts? Because it's key in life. And now it's the beginning of this field.
O seu grande desafio, imagino que o nó górdio das negociações hoje no mundo é o Oriente Médio, né?
It is, and I just got back from there, and one of the things is to me the Middle East is going through a huge change right now, a tectonic change, maybe the change, the first massive change like in 100 years of reorganizing even borders, thinking of how but the question is, how is everyone going to live together? And one of my passions is a project that I started 10 years ago, which is to create a kind of Santiago de Compostela in the Middle East called the Camino de Abraham, the Abraham path. And it's a long distance route that goes across the whole Middle East that ties the entire Middle East together around an ancient story that binds the Middle East together, which is the story of Abraham, or Ibrahim, who signifies what people in the Middle East are most proud of, which is their tradition of hospitality. He had his tent open in all 4 directions.
Para cristãos, muçulmanos e judeus, né?
Absolutely, for everyone. It's really for everyone. And to me, the future of the Middle East, long term, is either terrorism or tourism. And the Abraham Path is an initiative in tourism, in economic development. And the World Bank is now involved. National Geographic did a cover story of the 10 best new walking trails in the world. Provence, Wales, Tuscany. #1 was Abraham Path.
Quais foram as negociações mais difíceis que você fez?
Well, I've done, I mean, always the last negotiation is the most difficult, but one of them I remember was in Venezuela, where I had to negotiate with Hugo Chavez. And
Personagem, né?
yeah, he really was. And I was brought in, invited by the United Nations, because it was a time when there were 1 million people on the streets of Caracas demanding the resignation of Chavez, and 1 million people supporting him, and people were worried there would be violence and maybe even civil war. Anyway, at one point, I had a number of meetings with him, but one meeting in particular was, I had a meeting with him, it was at 9 o'clock at night in the presidential palace. And he liked to meet at night, and 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight, finally I'm ushered in to see him, and I expect to find him all alone, but he's got his entire cabinet. He says, "Here, have a seat. Tell me, what do you think of the situation here in Venezuela?" And I said, "Mr. President, I've been speaking to your ministers, I've been speaking to the opposition, and I think there's been a little bit of progress." Well, that was the wrong thing to say, because he said, "What? You're not seeing the dirty tricks those traders are up to?"
Americano.
Exactly, you're naive, you're foolish. He proceeded to lean very close to my face like this, maybe very close to my face, and shouted for approximately 30 minutes. And I was going, you know, all this work down the drain. But then I had a chance to go to the balcony for a moment and ask myself, you know, because I was thinking, you know, I'm not a fool, whatever. Is it really going to be in my interest, which is peace, to get into an argument with the president of Venezuela? So I said no. So I just listened to him, which is key in negotiation, just listen. So I just listened for 30 minutes, nodding my head. And after 30 minutes, I watched his shoulders sink a little bit. And so he said to me in a very weary tone of voice, "So Yuri, what should I do?" That's the sound of a human mind opening. That's when he was a little bit ready to hear something. Before that, he was just angry. And so I said, "Mr. President, I think the entire country needs to go to the balcony, because after all, last Christmas, it was just before Christmas, all the festivities were canceled because of the crisis. Why don't just declare a tregua, a truce, give everyone a truce for 3 weeks?" He said, "That's an excellent idea. I'm going to propose that in my next speech." His mood had entirely shifted, and he said, "You know, over Christmas I want you to come with me and travel around the country." And then he thought for a moment, he said, "But you're a mediator, maybe that wouldn't be so good to always be seen in my company. But no problem, I'll give you a disguise."
Inteligente.
His mood had completely shifted, and what I learned from that is the greatest power that we have is the power not to react, the power to go to the balcony, the power to listen. That's what can transform the situation.
Outro seu grande amigo é o Jim Carter, né?
Yes, yes, I am a great admirer and a friend of his. I just visited him.
Foi presidente que não se reelegeu, mas foi grande presidente do ponto de vista política externa, né?
Absolutely. Absolutely, everywhere. He was in the Middle East.
América Latina?
Yeah, I mean here,
Brazil?
Absolutely. With his human rights and democracy, he saved thousands and thousands of lives and paved the way for democracy. I think helped support the possibility of democracy that we now see throughout Latin America.
O que você diria para casal que estivesse brigando, homem e mulher? Essa é a briga mais difícil, né?
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. It's true.
Que conselho você daria para casal?
Well, the one thing I would say to me, which is the key to successful negotiation, is to talk less, listen more. It's about, to me, negotiation is not, we think of it as talking, but a successful negotiator is someone who knows how to listen. And listening, I don't just mean hearing the words, but what's behind the words, what's underneath the words, what are the feelings, what's not being said, what does that person really want? If we can learn to listen in that way, I think that's the key to a successful marriage.
Voltando para o início da sua carreira, eu me lembro que você foi conversar com Warren Buffett, né? Como é que foi aquela conversa?
Yeah, Warren Buffett was interested. He was interested in the nuclear issue because he was worried. He told me, you know, it's like there's a huge vat of marbles. They're all white, but there's one black one. And each time we have a crisis, we're reaching in and we're picking out a marble. Sometime we're going to pick out the wrong marble, the black marble. So, but when it was very interesting, because I just finished writing a book called Getting to Yes with Roger Fisher, and he said...
Você vendeu 15 milhões, mais ou menos?
Something like that, yeah, absolutely. And he said, but you know, in my line of business, yes is not the most important word. The most important word is no. And I said, what do you mean, Warren? He said, well, I sit there at my desk in Omaha, and I look at one investment opportunity after another, and I say no to this one, and no to this one, and no to this one. I say no 1,000 times until I find the one that I'm looking for, and then I say yes. And all I have to do is say yes maybe 5 times, and look at me, you know. He'd become a billionaire. So to me, what that showed is that yes is a very important word, but so is no. No, sometimes in life you have to say no in order to say yes to something even more important. And so I wrote a book about this, actually inspired by that comment, called The Power of a Positive No, of how to say no positively in a respectful way, because it's very hard for people, I think, a lot of people. We can't say no so easily. But the art of the positive no is key.
Professor, para terminar o programa, o que o senhor mais aprendeu na sua vida com essas negociações todas?
I think, you know, probably the biggest lesson I've learned in the end, you know, because I focused on negotiation, I focused on negotiating with extremely difficult people, in difficult situations, but maybe the most important lesson I've learned is that the person who's most difficult that we ever have to deal with in life is the person is right here. Is the person I look in the mirror every morning. It's the person you look at the mirror. If we can learn to turn ourselves from an internal enemy into an internal friend, if we can learn to get to yes with ourselves, then it'll be a lot easier to get to yes with others.
Muito obrigado.